This is Relationscapes, the podcast where we explore the terrain of human identity and connection. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode about mixed-race families is Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies, Samira Mehta.
My mom will often try to draw from her own experience, so I'll bring her a story of racism, and she'll try to connect with me with a story about what that's like for her as a woman. And I'll kind of want to be like, Mom, I'm also a woman. Like, do you think that being brown means that I don't experience sexism? All of your experience of sexism as a white woman does not actually help you understand my experience as a woman of color. And in fact, the thought that they might be the same can hurt me.
Samira Mehta was born to a white American mother and a South Asian immigrant father. And growing up, she often felt more comfortable with her mother's side of the family. They didn't slip into languages that she couldn't understand or tease her for finding the food too spicy. But as she got older, she saw more clearly how her father's culture had shaped her too, and that the people who loved her most hadn't prepared her enough for the racism she would face as a brown woman in America, including the ways racism was showing up inside her own family. Samira Mehta explores these tensions in her book, The Racism of People Who Love You, Essays on Mixed Race Belonging, and she joins us to talk about it right now. Samira Mehta, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to get to talk to you this morning.
We're talking about your book, The Racism of People Who Love You, and you say you started thinking about this project in the context of the 2016 election. Talk about how this book started to cook in your mind.
So academic life is sort of hard on people of color in lots of ways, and lots has been written about it. But I think that as a student, in many ways, I was shielded from that experience. And so I was in my first year on a tenure track job, and there was nobody really actively protecting me from some of the racism in the academy. There were a couple of people who were really trying to protect me, but in the academic hierarchy, they couldn't do it in the same way that my advisor could, right? And so that experience was happening sort of in my personal life. And then out there in the world, it was the run up to the 2016 election. And there was just a kind of vitriolic racism in the public sphere that I had never seen before. And so I was out to dinner with one of my best friends. And we were talking about that horrible vitriolic racism. And he was asking me, he's white, and he was asking me about how I felt and thought about it. And I somehow made the comment because I was contrasting these two experiences, right? Like sort of experiencing racism in my work environment in ways that I hadn't before. And also realizing that sometimes I didn't know how to deal with the racism in my work environment because in my family life, I had learned to make excuses for particular behaviors, right? So when there's a behavior that you think is problematic that comes from white people, but it comes from your mother, who you know would my mother quite literally took out a second mortgage on her home to send me to college, right? When you know that this is someone who would literally mortgage their future for you, how do you call them out on that? But then when you've learned to accept that totally unconscious behavior from one person, how do you say, well, okay, but you're my colleague. You're not somebody who I know and love and trust and can go by on your intention. Like, I have to call you out. How do you do that, right? So I had been thinking a lot about that. And my friend was asking me, like, how do you feel about people, like, saying the kinds of things that they're saying at Trump rallies? And I said, I mean, that's hateful. It's horrible. It's frightening. It terrifies me. But it doesn't hurt me in the way that the racism of people who love hurt me. And I was thinking both about the actual pain of a comment from within your family or from one of your closest friends, and also the fact that it hurts you to learn to accept those things.
And talk a little bit more about that hurt. Like, is it because you feel like you don't have the same kind of recourse, or where does that come from?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's really hard to see when it comes from loved ones. Something that people say a lot of the time when they do things that are wrong. When you say something racist, or you say something homophobic, or you say something sexist, and you would never, that doesn't line up with your politics, right? You don't think that you're saying something racist. You believe that Black Lives Matter. You have a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard. A friend of mine just posted on the internet a picture that he's from like a really expensive college town, or he's not from there, but he works at the college and lives in this very expensive college town. And he posted a photo from like one of his neighbor's yards, and it was like a Black Lives Matter sign, one of those signs that is like, science is real and all love is love and nobody is illegal. And
water is good.
And the people also had a sign against the low-income housing.
Okay.
Right. So these people, they have all of the right values, but they don't want their property value hurt or the tenor of their community changed. And they don't understand that these are interlocking things, right?
Right.
But they would never, if you said that's racist, they would never be able to hear that, right? They have a Black Lives Matter sign in their yard. And so when you grow up around and loving people like that, they want their intent to count rather than their impact, and you learn to let them. And the reality is that their intent does matter to you, right? Like, I'm never gonna, people do this, but I'm not personally going to try to get into a conversation with like folks marching in Charlottesville, Virginia, right? I'm not going to. I mean, yelling like Jews will not replace us. I would totally get into conversations with the people trying to protect their community from that. But I would never get into conversations with people marching with torches through the streets, yelling racist things.
You don't expect a dialogue there.
No, but I am going to say to my beloved best friend, hey, when you said that, I think you're not understanding where I'm coming from. I don't think you mean to be supporting a racist system. And indeed, when my friend and I were talking and I said this thing, like the racism that really hurts me is the racism of people who love me. He paused and he said, are you talking about me? And the thing is that in that moment, I hadn't been trying to get him to ask that question, right? I had been thinking about trying to make friends at work and watching people have racial blind spots and watching those racial blind spots hurt me, or wanting them to debate. Somebody did something super racist and somebody who I love very much was like, well, I can't imagine that he'd be racist. I'd hate to think that of him. And I kind of wanted to say, well, but here I am, a person of color, telling you that he did this thing to me. Give me an explanation that isn't racism. Like, being a total asshole, you could tell me that he does this to the white people too, in which case he's a total asshole. But it's actually easier to believe that on some level he's unconsciously racist. Also, prove to me that he's doing it to the white people. Right? Like, so I was thinking about all of that, but when my best friend asked me if I was talking about him, I had to say, kind of, because of course there had been moments in our friendship, and including the moment that I write about in the book when I actually called him on it. And like, we had this argument and he said, are you saying that I'm racist? And I don't remember if I said yes, but I didn't say no in my memory right now. And now I'm like, how did I write about it? Memory is weird, right? But in my memory, there was this long pause in which I didn't say I wasn't saying that. And he said to me, well, that's just really great. And we had this like awkward meal together and then went to bed.
Yeah, I remember, like, the way you talk about it is that you talk about the mental calculation that you had to do when he asked you, are you talking about me. And then you had to be like, okay, now I need to make this decision about how open and honest I am in this moment about this thing. You, from what I recall, you were explaining a TSA encounter,
Yes.
right? Like you had been pulled aside yet again by the TSA in the airport and searched yet again. And you were pointing out that this disproportionately happens to people of color. You've experienced that. And the friend was like, I don't know, they're just trying to keep us all safe. I think it's a good trade-off for us all to feel safe, don't you think? And you're like, whoa, hold on a second.
Right. And also in that argument, like I was wanting him to take into account how it felt, how violating this can feel.
Yeah.
And he made the comment, like, basically, don't argue with emotion, argue with logic. So it also felt sexist.
And it's also like emotion and logic can't be separated either. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a fiction that, and also sexist, as you say, like women are emotional and men are logical and this kind of attitude.
But also your desire to feel safe is a feeling, right?
Yeah,
the
exactly.
privileging of some people feeling safe over other people not being racially profiled is a feeling.
Right.
So we had this horrible fight. But what I was thinking is like, look, if I say right then, yes, I'm saying that you're racist, that's like the worst thing that you can say to a good liberal white person.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I like this phrase you use, the one drop racism rule. Like we think of the one drop thing used to be like if you have one drop of black heritage or blood, you're, whatever, you're taking it to be like one drop racism rule. If you've done anything racist, then you're a total racist.
Right.
And
then,
so
then all of a sudden you might as well get out of whitehood. And that's a horrible thing to believe about oneself. And it's a horrible way to feel that somebody would think that of you. And it doesn't really allow room for growth, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I've done other conversations, and sometimes with hosts who are people of color, and they've sort of said, like, are you giving space for, like, the white fragility of white people when you sort of take into account what their intent might be? And to me, I'm doing two things when I take intent into account. One is I'm saying, I know that you may be thinking this thing or that thing or this other thing, all of which give you sort of the benefit of the doubt, right? So I write in another place in the book about my aunt saying, me coming downstairs from the guest room in Indian clothes, like really casual, not fancy Indian clothes. And it was blisteringly hot. It was July. There was no air conditioning in the house. So this is like really cool clothing. And my aunt saying to me, what are you, super ethnic now? And I run through all of the things that my aunt might be thinking, including as a white woman who lives in liberal communities, there's a lot of appropriation of Asian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And my aunt would know that that's problematic, in part because she knows my dad's family, some of whom think it's problematic. So in that moment, maybe she was forgetting that even though I'm culturally so much more apiece with American culture than I am with the Indian immigrant side of my family, my relationship to Indianness is really different than hers. It isn't cultural appropriation to do this. And also, what would be wrong with being super ethnic and embracing and trying to connect more with that side of my heritage, right? Like, why would that be bad? But I sort of explore why she might have said that, why she might have been taken aback, how you don't expect to have to code switch in your own family and in your own home. And of course, if you're mixed race, you never have that luxury. But my Indian family doesn't think they're going to have to code switch in their own homes either.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody was like, aren't you just giving room to her white fragility when you run through all of those things? And part of what I'm doing is I'm saying, I know these things and I'm still bothered. So you can't explain, oh, you didn't mean any harm. You were just thinking X, Y, and Z. I know that you're thinking X, Y, and Z. Or at least I know that you're thinking X and Y. I might not know all of what you're thinking, but I know some of what you're thinking. And it still hurts. I know and believe in your good intentions. You don't need to explain them to me, and you've still done something problematic. So partly I'm trying to disarm people saying, oh, if you knew where I was coming from, you wouldn't be bothered. I'm saying, yes, I do. I've known you all my life. I've got a guess. I might be wrong, but I've got a generous guess and it still bothers me. But the other thing that I'm doing is I'm saying, I know that you're not like those people in Charlottesville. I know that you're not the police beating Rodney King. I know all of that. And yet, like, and so, like, I'm willing to give you space to learn and grow. Like, you're still hurting me, and yet you still hurt me. But, like, here it is. And, like, the friend who who I was talking about, who, like, with the TSA incident, he's still my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And people keep asking me when I give talks, like, how do you decide when something is a deal breaker?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, if we have a close, loving relationship, you'd have to do something really terrible for me to cancel you based on one thing. That one thing is one data point. And, like, you might have to earn some trust back after that one data point. But I want to stick around and see if you can. If when you do that one thing, I realized that actually I wasn't really surprised, it made sense. It was the most egregious thing, but there were lots of other things that sort of, if I had been looking, I wouldn't be surprised. That's
Mm-hmm.
different. But if, like my friend, you've shocked me with your opinion, then I'm going to stick around and see whether that was a weird aberration. And can we
Yeah.
talk through it? And can you learn and grow? You know, he's the person who, when I said, we had this whole conversation, and I said, you know, I toy with writing about this. And he said, stop toying and do it. Like, you need to write about this. It was his idea. Or his permission, right? Like, I had been toying with it, but I was, again, afraid that I would lose the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And he was
Right.
like, oh no, you should do it. And he's read over this multiple times. He knew what was in it when it was published. He told me recently that what he forgot to ask me to put in is that he doesn't think any of those things anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad he didn't ask me to, because I would have declined. I would have said, like, this is a story about the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, yes, there's been a lot of growth. Honestly, I'm not sure he believed it at the time. Like, I think at the time he might have been having fun playing devil's advocate and not realizing the harm that he was doing, which is also different from having an opinion that you're willing to double down on.
Yeah.
Not better, just to be clear.
Yeah, and it seems like you're sort of trying to do that math, and you say you've got pushback from some people of color who, it seems like, you know, maybe your proximity to whiteness and white culture maybe leads you to be more inclined to do that kind of connecting mental work. I also think maybe, like, you might be at different points in your life in different mental spaces where sometimes you have more bandwidth to withstand some of the microaggressions and some of the racism, whereas maybe other times in your life it just wouldn't work, and you'd say, actually, for my own protection and safety, I need to break this off at least for a while. So it seems context dependent too, like how you'd react.
I think it's very context dependent, right? It's that thing about whether or not what you're getting is confirmation or surprise.
Yeah.
It's whether in that moment you have the bandwidth to put up with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's whether you think that the relationship is strong enough to take the hit and to rebuild trust. It's whether you think the person, even if they're not in that moment, is self-reflective enough to go back and think about it, right?
Yeah, right.
And I would never tell somebody else what to do. I mean, and you said something about maybe it's my proximity to white culture. And what I would say is proximity to white culture is really dangerous. Because it can lead you to forgive, right? Like I said, if you've learned how to forgive a behavior on the part of your mom or your grandmother or your uncle or your father or, right, like your cousin or your best friend, you're letting more of that go out there in the world, right? It's like
Yeah, you become the excuse for it too. Like, oh, but I know Samira. I can't be racist.
Right, and she doesn't mind when I say this. And the answer is, I actually do mind, but I've done some sort of cost-benefit analysis. And I'm not telling you about it, and I'm privately thinking less well of you, but, like, have decided not to go there.
Right.
But also, it can lead you to hurt yourself, right? What happens when you've learned how to accept a behavior from your mother
Hmm.
but then you get it from your boss. And so like the example that I'm thinking of is my mom will often try to draw from her own experience. So I'll bring her a story of racism, and she'll try to connect with me with a story about what that's like for her as a woman, right? Like
Right.
how she,
Misogyny and sexism.
and I'll
Yeah.
kind of want to be like, Mom, I'm also a woman. Like, maybe if you were talking to a man who was not white, that would work. Like, oh, that's how racism works in your life. This is like, don't explain sexism to me. Do you think that being
Right.
brown means that I don't experience sexism? Like, stop, like, be quiet and listen to me tell you about my experience and understand that there's a gap. Like, you're not. All of your experience of sexism as a white woman does not actually help you understand my experience as a woman of color. And in
Right.
fact, the thought that they might be the same can hurt me, because this is the same woman who taught me that if I got lost in a crowd in the 1980s, remember Stranger Danger? Um,
I do.
that I should go find a police officer, right? This is the same
Right.
woman who taught me. And of course, if you're a white woman, you should go. I mean, turns out that domestic violence and rape are huge in the police force, but leaving that aside, right? Like, of course, if you're a white woman, the police are there to protect you. If you're a brown woman, that's not true, right? And so failure to understand those differences are huge.
Hmm.
But, and my mother now knows that, right? Like my mom has learned that. But learning to sort of accept and put up with that dynamic from my mother, and even appreciate it as her attempt to connect,
Hmm.
has made it really hard for me to know what to do when white women who are my supervisor or my mentor, or a
Hmm.
supervisor who wants to be a mentor. So like you take a problem in the classroom to your mentor. And my most recent mentor is a woman of color. So like I'm not talking about her. But you take a problem to a mentor and the mentor tells you how they would deal with it. And as she's
Right.
talking, you realize that because she's white and you're not, her advice is actually probably not going to work for you. But
Right.
now you've gotten advice from somebody in a hierarchical relationship to you,
Hmm.
and you're in trouble if you don't follow it, or at least you're potentially in trouble if you don't follow it. But you can tell that it won't work.
And your muscle memory is all ready to excuse it because you've
Exactly.
done that with your mom for years.
Exactly. And it was
Hmm.
hard to learn not to trust your mom, right? Like you got hurt every time you
Yeah.
learned that your mom's experience didn't match, but you still have that muscle memory of trust.
Yeah. Multiracial folks experience love and hurt and racism in these really complicated ways. And you're not alone in this. I mean, your book gives us really great context here. You say there's been a huge growth of multiracial people in the United States. In 2010, it was about 3% of the population. That's jumped up to 10% by 2020. And for you, 2.7 million are half white, half Asian. You have South Asian heritage and white Midwestern American heritage. So you're kind of situating yourself in this broader picture and using your personal stories to talk about what it's like to experience racism from the people that love you, especially from family members. And so it really stood out to me where you talked about feeling culturally uncomfortable, where you could often feel more racially comfortable, but racially uncomfortable where you could feel more culturally comfortable.
Right. So my friend Tom came up with that phrase to describe the book. He sent it to me in email after reading a chapter. So
Hmm.
that came from a white British Cambridge educated man,
Yeah. Wow.
which I
Okay.
loved. I felt very seen, right? Like that's a gift of someone really
Yeah.
paying attention to you. And it's true, right? Like, or at least it's sort of true. My South Asian family isn't necessarily, or at least the kind of generation that I'm the oldest of the grandchildren born in the United States.
Okay.
And the youngest grandchild is maybe 18 years younger than I am. So I would be really open to the discovery that her experience is very different from mine, because in the like 20 years of intervening time, people learned things, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But for me, my family is high caste. And so in their experience of India, they are used to being sort of on the top, right? They're Hindu, they're high caste. So it's not like my dad and his siblings and his community had a lot of experience with being racialized minorities. And
Yeah, he didn't have an underdog feeling then. He sort of had a privileged sort of feeling.
one assumes, and he assumed, I think, and this is, I think, a very common assumption among immigrants, particularly immigrants who possibly took a social step down in moving to the United States, but maybe even others, that the point of coming is in some ways to give yourself a better life, but mostly to give your kids a better life. You will be an immigrant, but your kids will be American. And my father really needed that to be true. So he gave up a lot of social privilege and capital and his network of college friends and colleagues and all of that to come to the United States, where he needed to believe that what he was experiencing was anti-immigrant bias and not racism.
Right.
Because if it was racism, it would pass on to us. And if it was anti-immigrant bias, it would end with him. And he kind of needed to believe that it was partly that he had an accent and didn't always understand what was going on, and also that he hadn't gone to fancy American schools. And look, I've been watching what has happened with my book, and nothing has come of this yet. But I think something like 30 friends have nominated my book for campus read books on their colleges. And why is that the case? I went to Swarthmore. I went to Harvard. I went to Emory. I have this crazy network of people who became professors. And that's how my book is getting nominated for those things in various college campuses. And again, it's usually a longish process, right? So I don't know if anything will ever come of that, but I can see my network working, right? And my father didn't have that. So in some ways, he's right.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
But in other ways, I'm currently making plans to drive from Denver to New England. And I am thinking about where is it going to feel dangerous as a person of color?
Yeah, to stop at a hotel or to eat at a restaurant or whatever.
Right. And I have a friend, the first time I did the drive, I was worried about it. And a white friend came with me so that I would be driving with a white woman. I then did it twice, once on either end of, I went home at the start of the pandemic and came back when school went back in person. I did those trips solo, and it was a little nerve-wracking. And I'm now doing it with a friend is flying out and doing it with me. So I'll be once again doing the trip with a white woman.
Right. And these are the kind of calculations like your father might not have anticipated. I think.
Well, my father also spent every single moment really of his life in the United States with a white woman, right? He and my mom were married within 3 years of my father getting here. And my father occasionally traveled without my mother. Every now and then he'd go on a business trip or something like that. But I grew up doing the classic American vacation where you get in a car and you drive.
Yeah, the road trip. Yeah.
But always with both of my parents.
Right. And you talk about the kind of, I sensed a sort of loneliness from you in a sense, as you talked about some of the ways that your white mother might overlook the way that you experience racism, but also the ways that your own Indian father would overlook it, in part because he really wanted to believe, as you said, that racism wasn't a factor. Rather, it would be this immigrant bias that would go away for you. He wanted to believe that you wouldn't have to experience that. And that seemed to evoke a kind of loneliness for you because you couldn't really go to either parent to get that really necessary validation and coaching and sort of support through the racism you were experiencing.
Well, and I think also having to defend it as racism, right? My mom didn't have a context. Neither of them had a context for microaggressions. I just said my mom didn't, but the reason I'm going to her and not my dad is that my mom was really the person doing the child rearing, right?
Right. And you say you're more of a Connecticut Yankee yourself.
Yeah. It's not that my mom was worse at it than my father. It's that my mother was far more present than my father. And so, I mean, my father just worked really long hours. And I think also I am an age where the model minority myth was very important for Asian communities. And the model minority myth is a terrible, terrible thing. It's not good for Asian people, right? Because it says if you just work hard enough, you'll be accepted as white. And then anytime that you're not accepted as white, it becomes very easy to say, see, you didn't work hard enough. And so also I grew up at a moment when there wasn't a lot of awareness. I think now the model minority sort of stereotype is understood to be at best a double-edged sword for many Asians. But that was also less true when I was growing up, right? That perhaps also contributed to some
Mm,
of the loneliness, right?
okay. All of this kind of reminds me of the failing the authenticity test chapter. This is a chapter where you're talking about how, depending on the context you're in, you're kind of being judged according to how authentic you are to your Indian side of your heritage or being perceived as white. And you talk about how in your family dynamic, sometimes there might be like sexism, like your father might do stuff that was really sexist or whatever. And you're trying to figure out, like, is this kind of rooted in Indian culture? Is this just family dynamics? But then there's the problem of if you try to critique it, you might come across as a white colonizer sort of police of a culture, right? So it gets really tricky even within your own family when you're trying to think about how authentic you are, what authentic Indian culture even is, how you can critique that culture if you can. It's a very complicated dynamic.
Yeah. And to be fair to my father, I could always push back against sexism where my father was concerned, without getting too much into that dynamic. The place where it could be a problem was that my parents went far more, not completely, and I'm sure that like people with no Indianness in their family would see a lot of Indianness in how my nuclear family operated. But my father basically figured he had moved to the United States and he was raising American women. And
Mm-hmm.
so he allowed for a certain amount of pushback where it became a problem. When I was 24, my father and I traveled to India together. And part of what was wrong was that my father wanted to sort of have it both ways. Like he wanted to make all of the decisions, but we were like, it was sort of unclear. Were we two adults traveling together, paying our own way? Or were we a parent and a child traveling together?
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen is my father would want to make the decisions, but would want me to pay my own way. And so, for instance, he would want to travel and he would maybe be right that this was the safest thing to do, right? Like, I don't know. But he would be like, we should go on this trip to see this friend. And I would be like, I can't afford that plane ticket. Or
Mm.
I knew that we were going to some weddings. I knew that I would maybe buy something dressy to wear to the weddings. But my father didn't want me wearing the same outfit to both weddings because it was going to be all the same people and wanted me wearing Indian clothes to the like run up to the weddings. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of the, North Indian weddings go on for days. And I
Mm.
had like, I don't know, I had a really pretty skirt and blouse, and I'd gotten this skirt in Paris and was very proud. It was my Paris couture. It wasn't actual couture. I had just bought it in Paris, just to be clear. And like embroidered like top from Ann Taylor and the embroidery matched the skirt. And I was very proud of having put this together. My father wanted me to like have many Indian outfits for these
Mm-hmm.
events. And I was a student and I was like, I can't, even if I can pay for those outfits, I don't have a use for them in my normal life. Like anyone who doesn't understand that I am going to buy one very, very fancy sari and wear it to all of the fancy sari events and like dry clean it in between. Like, I don't care what they think, but my father did care, right? So
Right.
sometimes there was that tension, which I think has more to do with who my father was than it had to do with his Indianness. But then the way that it would get navigated, I felt totally free to talk back to him. I felt totally free to be like, dude, you can call the shots and pay my way, or I can pay my way, in which case you need to let me call the shots about my money, right? Like,
Right.
or not in other ways, like sort of not be obedient. And for my father, in the American context, that was fine. But in an Indian context, he felt, I think, like he was losing face. I wasn't giving him
Mm-hmm.
the appropriate amount of deference. Now, it's also worth noting that when this happened, my father had not lived in India in about 30 years.
Hmm.
So it's all, and had been back to visit twice in that 30-year period of time. So it's also totally possible, and this is part of what's complicated around the question of authenticity, right? Which is sort of a chimera anyway. But like the India that my father knew was in India before the United States had experienced second wave feminism, right? Like my father left India in about 1970. The bulk of like women in the United States had been able to have credit cards for like a year or so when he
Right.
moved to the United States. And so the kind of deference that he expected daughters to give to their fathers might have been completely and totally in line with Indian culture. It also might have been a full generation out of date. Right? And so that is the kind of thing that would happen with my dad. What would happen, like sort of the colonizer thing is more you're navigating, like I'd be encountering and interacting with my father's friends, right? And they would treat me like they would be excruciatingly patronizing, basically. Like I don't want to say that there is no sexual harassment. Obviously there is, but these are my father's friends. They're
Sure.
not being that kind of inappropriate with me at all. I just want to be super clear. They're being patronizing. Oh, you're such a nice girl. You just don't understand. Okay, if I don't understand, explain it to me. But let's not assume, right, like I was at no point in my education, and I had not yet gone to grad school, although this remains true. At no point in my education have I ever really studied the relationship between India, Pakistan, the Soviet Union, and the United States during the Cold War. Right? Like, and the upshot is that despite the fact that India is the largest democracy, they had closer ties to the USSR, and the United States had closer ties to Pakistan. So I said something that didn't reflect knowing that history. And I was told, oh, you're such a sweet girl. Of course you think that. You just don't. And I'm like, okay, give me the geopolitical lesson.
Right.
But like, let's assume here that I'm capable of understanding if given the information. Let's also understand that I might think that you're a biased source, depending on what you have to say. Maybe not, right? It would probably depend on, as you said, like all of this is contextual. How is it being explained? Like, I'm not going to be like, oh yes, anti-Americanism is the way to go. But I'm also not like a particularly nationalistic person. I'm fine with, right? Like, but like, I'm going to reject the idea that what my administration does makes me personally bad. Possibly me personally responsible, but not me personally evil, right? And so like, how is this going to go? And in that situation, if I push back, right, there is this, are you being the ugly American? Are you, if you critique gender expectations in the extended family, will you be told this is our culture and you should respect it? Which is maybe true if I'm not actually also a member of the family, right? Do I have the right to participate in creating a family that has space for my cultural assumptions? And, families are not monoliths. So there are absolutely relatives who would think that I automatically have that right? Like, I have some relatives who live in India who are, like, impressed that I can be as polite as I can be in India, but have no expectation that I would. From their standpoint, like, of course she's an American and she's culturally different.
So they're like, she's doing pretty good.
Right. There are going to be relatives who think that you don't have that right at all, right? Like you're the younger generation. We set the tones for the family. And then there are going to be people who say, of course you should do that, but then it's going to feel really uncomfortable and they're going to push back. And they're not even going to necessarily understand why. And in the moment, neither am I. It's not like as I'm navigating these experiences, have like sometimes I have this running commentary. I have this colleague who likes to write about religious experience, and I was critiquing his work for not taking systemic structures of oppression into account. And he's like, well, but people don't experience those. When you experience whatever, do you think, this is sexism? And I was like, duh, of course I do. Right? Like people know about the structures of oppression that shape their lives. I kind of said to him, the only reason you don't think you do is because you're a white man.
What did he say?
I think I said that in my head and I didn't say it out loud.
Okay. It's one of those moments,
I think I
yes.
said it in my head, or I thought of it at 3:00 in the morning, right? Like then, right.
Right.
But you think about it late, you realize it later. You don't realize it in the moment. And that also means that you can't deal with it in the moment, right?
Right.
You're just reacting.
It's interesting because sometimes you can, because some things are very repetitive. I'm thinking of your chapter, Where Are You From? Right? This is a question that you'll get, and it could happen so often that you really could develop a repertoire of responses to this, especially when white people would approach you and just say, well, where are you from? And you might say, oh, I'm from Connecticut. And they would say, well, no, like, where are you from? Right. And they're actually talking about race.
Right. So like I will always tell people I'm from New Haven, Connecticut, which is sort of true, but it's not really true, right? I'm from a town right outside of New Haven, Connecticut that is so small that it doesn't have its own grocery store. I say in the book, and this is true, it has 2 farm stands. When I was growing up there, neither of them were open between Thanksgiving and Easter. One of them had a fire, and when they like renovated after the fire, they also winterized. So they're now open all year. So like you could probably buy, I think you can buy milk there and pretty like expensive produce. But like it's the kind of place where you can get gourmet cheese and focaccia, but I'm not sure that you could buy like dish detergent or toilet paper.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So like the grocery store is in New Haven. And so I'll tell people that I'm from New Haven, Connecticut. And then when they say, no, where are you really from? That's when I'll back up and say that I'm from my small town.
So then that's your second answer, is the smaller town, which, again, the questioner's going to be more confused at this point.
I'll be like, oh, well, I guess I'm not really from New Haven. I always say that because people have never heard of where I'm from. This is where I'm from.
Yeah.
And then if they say, no, where are you really from? I'll be like, okay, obviously my small town doesn't have a hospital. So my birth certificate says I'm from New Haven. And if they push beyond that, because at this point I'm clearly digging in my heels, I'll say, do you ask every single white person you meet where their ancestry is from? I think that's
so
an honor in the world of white people, basically reserved for redheads who are presumed to be Irish.
Yeah, or Scottish. With my red beard, it does happen occasionally.
Fair. I mean, I'm not saying they are consistently Irish. I'm saying they're presumed, right?
Where's this question coming from for you? Like, you've encountered it throughout your life.
Yeah.
Where is it coming from, do you think?
So I think that Americans assume that if you are not white or potentially black, you are a perpetual foreigner, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're white, that seems like a plausible American identity, although obviously your ancestry is from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know.
Or if you're black in a predominantly white area, I think that happens here. I'm in Salt Lake, I'm in Utah, so that can happen here. Like, well, where are you from? Because it's so predominantly white here.
Right. I think if you're black and you're in Salt Lake and you say, I'm from here, I bet that goes weird. I suspect that if you say, oh, I'm from North Carolina,
right,
that ends the conversation and makes sense to people.
That's what people wanted to find out.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to find out. They assume you're from, and again, I'm not saying that's fine, right? That person might very well be from Portland, Oregon, or from Moab, right? Like,
sure, exactly.
That's a total possibility. And the assumption is that like the infinite regression of where are you from, like that's a fair thing to do to somebody who isn't white. I think it does happen less to black people because I think people are aware enough of sort of what black people are doing in the United States. And of course, sometimes the answer is I am descended from enslaved people. And sometimes the answer is, oh, my parents moved here from Nigeria like 3 years before I was born. Right?
Yeah, right.
Like, or I moved here from Nigeria when I was 4, which is why I don't have an accent, why I have an American accent. Or, oh, you're identifying something in my voice. And I actually I did a talk about this where are you from question at a synagogue. And one of the women there was South African and white South African. And she said, people ask me where I'm from all of the time and I never mind. And I said, that makes sense to me though, because from your accent, you moved here as an adult, or at least as like a later in your childhood.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I have a really good friend who moved to the United States from England when she was 5, and she has an American accent until she gets on the phone with relatives, right?
Yeah.
So what I said to this woman is like, you sound like you're from South Africa. That's something that comes from your lived experience rather than from your genetics, right? And so asking you where you're from is a question about your life.
Also, she might feel from somewhere, whereas you really are from here.
Right.
So, like, if she's asked where she's from, she really has her own compelling answer that makes sense to her, rather than, as for you, it's like, well, I know what you're thinking about me, but it's not, but I'm actually from Connecticut.
Well, and I should say that I don't mind being asked where I'm from. What I mind is when people don't accept my answer. So, like, I live in Denver, Colorado, which feels like an awfully foreign country to me a lot of the time. Right? Like, the weather it's like never mind that it's culturally pretty different from the Northeast, but
Yeah.
like, I get dehydrated. When I first moved here, I was constantly dehydrated because
Right.
I didn't know that I needed to take water with me. Right? Like, the inside of my nose dries out. It snows one day and it's 60 degrees the next day. Like, it's just a very different place.
Mm-hmm.
So when people ask me where I'm from, I'm perfectly happy to tell them that I'm from the Northeast.
But then it's when they're like, but no, where are you from?
Right. Or where are you really from? So, like,
Yeah, really.
the question never bothers me. Like, so I got my PhD at Emory, and they have these, like, really famous people who are professors. And what they have to do is they have to show up in 6 different classes over the course of the year. So Jimmy Carter was one of them.
Oh.
And Jimmy Carter came to a class that I was the teaching assistant for, and he had us all go around the room and say where we were from. And Jimmy Carter, of course, ran for president and is a politician. I think he was, like, better at he's a better humanitarian than he was a politician.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't win a second term, but he's a politician. And so for every single person, he had something to say about where they were from.
Yeah, because he had some sort of connection there.
Right.
So.
And so I said I was from New Haven, and he said, they put clams on pizza there.
Do they really?
Yes, they do. And I said, yes, they do. And he said, and tell me, they like it? And I was like, many of them love it. I'm a vegetarian, but many of them love it.
Yes.
And I love that, right? Like, I don't mind that. First of all, he was asking everybody. But second, like, I don't care. Like, even if I suspect that you're not asking all of the white people in the room, I don't mind if you ask me, as long as you accept that I'm from, like, the New Haven suburbs.
Right. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good chapter. Again, I should remind people, the book is called The Racism of People Who Love You, and that chapter stood out to me a lot. It's near the beginning of the book. I think it's a good way to kind of start it off. But I want people to check that essay out. You just mentioned being a vegetarian. Let's talk about the meat is murder chapter. This is also kind of about identity and the complications of, like, what authenticity is and what identity really is, because some people might assume that you're a vegetarian because of your Asian background, because of being from India, right? And then other people, but for you, you're like, you kind of think it's more rooted in revulsion. Like, you actually just don't like meat. This is more of just like, that you don't like it, right?
Well, so I think it's complicated, right? Like, if you were to ask me why I'm a vegetarian and I were to answer the question, I might bring up the revulsion, but probably I would talk about animal rights and environmentalism. I would sound like somebody who went to Swarthmore College in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine actually tells a really funny story about, my friend lives in New York, and he told me this story. We were going out to lunch, and he had looked for a place with good vegetarian food, like, near where I was going to be, because I had, like, this tiny little window. And he was like, realized that the only places he knew were, like, non-vegetarian friendly. And so it had been harder than anticipated. And he told me this story about 10, like, people we went to college with all got together. Somebody had come into town, and so there was, like, a gathering of all of the people from college they knew. And they were like, okay, where are we going to go for dinner? Does anyone have any dietary restrictions? And nobody did. And they were like, how is it possible that we have 10 Swarthmore alums here and nobody is a vegetarian or a vegan? And then they were like, okay, who used to be vegetarian or vegan? And the entire room raised their hand. And in my case, like, I every now and then will like be in a situation in which like I'll eat some shellfish or something really low on the
Yeah.
food chain if I'm
Yeah.
like I was recently stuck in an airport and they had some sort of clam chowder made without bacon, but they were
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
their one vegetarian thing. They like had Impossible Burgers and they were out. And so I had a bowl of the clam chowder.
Yeah. This
Um,
is my partner too. She'll eat some fish sometimes or something
yeah,
like
and I
that.
won't really eat like non-shellfish. Like if I think it had cognition, I'm out.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So it is more like animal rights oriented, in addition to whatever revulsion because you talk about too, just like being grossed out by it as a little kid.
Yeah, it's also true that, like, I don't know because I kind of tapped out of paying attention when I stopped eating it. But, like, we eat pretty high up on the food chain in terms of the ocean, right? Like,
Yeah.
tuna is in a pretty important, like, overfishing is a big deal, is kind of what I'm saying, right? Or at least it was when I, like, was like, "That's it, I'm out," and then I stopped paying attention.
Yeah.
But I sound like that. But if you think about the way that I conduct myself, I don't want things touching, right?
Yeah, this is a story. And on Thanksgiving, you had prepared a special dish because there's so much meat at Thanksgiving. You prepared your own special dish, and then you had this aunt who like dipped the serving spoon or whatever into the meat dish, and then used that same one and dipped it into this other dish that you had spent so much time preparing, and it ruined Thanksgiving. Like your dish was
I
done.
mean, in all fairness, it wasn't like the most elaborate dish. But yeah, like it was one of those things where to me that dish
You're
ceases.
so you're so in all fairness, Samira. You're so in all fairness. They ruined your Thanksgiving special dish.
Sure. And to me, it's no longer vegetarian, right? And
Exactly.
there was like other context to it. I had a boyfriend who had been at like I had been with this guy for quite a while, and he was really good at making sure there was vegetarian food for me.
Okay.
And then the year after we broke up, I put a lot of work into helping my mother cook the meal. But he
Yeah.
was the person who he would always do one thing, and it would be the special thing for me. And I
Okay.
had sort of I hadn't stopped appreciating that he was doing that. But I hadn't realized that in the time he had been doing that, it was sort of like all of the responsibility had landed on him. And so like there wasn't going to be, so I had a couple of years when like it was like kind of not working for me. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is why he did this thing. And I was like, okay, I can do that for myself. I can take care of myself. But it was to my aunt, I think, like, why wouldn't that be vegetarian, right?
Because you wouldn't eat it after that, and
again,
she seemed upset by that
she
too,
was
didn't
super
she?
upset. She was really
Yeah.
ticked. She thought I was being like difficult.
That's what was weird to me is that she wasn't apologetic to you. She was almost like, "How dare you not eat your dish that I stuck this spoon
Yeah,
in?" Which
yeah,
seems so harsh.
yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that is true is that my mom's family has a super strong family culture. And like people aren't super adapting to things that are outside of their culture.
Hmm.
And so to my aunt, like I wasn't, and my mom's family really values a kind of rationalism. So if I'm saying I'm vegetarian for animal rights reasons and environmental reasons, and moving the spoon does not support any of those industries,
Right, exactly.
what's
Yeah.
the big deal? And my mother, when I
Right.
talked to her about it later, and I didn't even know this, explained to me that like when I was very small, I had been taught to never do that because in Hinduism, that would render the entire dish non-vegetarian. And we would go to these potlucks where there would be like lots of vegetarian food and then like a chicken dish. And you had to keep all of the spoons separate.
Right. You can't cross-contaminate.
Right. But it's like such a big piece of Indian culture because there are always vegetarians around who are going to care about that. And it's not like I don't, it's not, I like everybody else have read Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential. I know that restaurant kitchens, who knows what's going on back there.
Yeah, there's plenty of cross-contamination back there.
But in my mom's house, like in my own, like when I've seen it, right? Like it's no skin off of anyone's nose except mine in that moment to make a peanut butter sandwich instead.
Right.
Right. And that's what I'd rather do. If you had me over for a cookout and touched my veggie burger with the spatula that you had been flipping meat with, I would probably eat the hamburger anyway. But I have these friends here in Colorado Springs where I went for a cookout at their house, and the very first day, they got out tinfoil and a different set of tongs for my vegetarian food. And I totally noticed and appreciated that, right? But in
Yeah,
my
that's
own
cool.
home or in my mother's home, I don't feel that I have to do that. Like, I don't feel that I should have to eat something that I'm uncomfortable with. Like, I'll do it to be polite outside of my house, but if you're a member of
Sure.
my family and you've disrupted things, I don't feel like I'm being really rude to you to say, actually,
That
no.
doesn't work. Yeah.
Right.
But you also talk about how like your mom's side of the family and your dad's side of the family would read your vegetarianism differently too, right? And because for your dad's side, for people who are into practicing Hinduism, or
Eh,
who
they're
maybe aren't,
culturally
it's more
Hindu.
like
They're not
yeah,
super
it's more like
religious.
yeah. So like people that aren't like vegetarian on that side look at your vegetarianism and are kind of like unsettled by it for different reasons, right?
Well, I
Like,
think
what are
they're
you
just
trying to
sort
be
of,
holier than thou kind of a
I
thing?
don't even know if it's that. I think they're sort of annoyed by it. They think it's silly. They think it's pointless and impossible in the United States. And I find this really annoying because I feel like there's a constant critique of not being Indian enough. And here is this thing
Yeah.
about which I'm very, very Indian.
Yeah.
And then that's critiqued as being annoying.
Again, the power of your book speaks to these dynamics that had never really crossed my mind. I obviously don't have a mixed race background in that sense and have not experienced these kind of tensions that exist between these two sides of your family and how something as simple as vegetarianism can be received so differently by different sides of the family.
Well, and I think sometimes it's about race and sometimes it's about culture.
Hmm. Yeah, and how do you like pick that apart too, right? Like how can you,
Well,
you know,
so I think part of what's really complicated is because of the racial dynamics of the United States, when it's about culture and it's the white side of the family who's sort of not being accommodating of the other culture, there is sort of this inherent element of racism because race is sort
hmm
of about the power dynamics of the United States.
hmm
Right? Or it's the white family not knowing, seeing, or understanding how life plays out differently for people of color, right?
right.
On the Indian side of the family, I tend not to call it racism because the power dynamic is different. I tend to think about it in terms of authenticity
hmm
policing or cultural difference, but it can be every bit as uncomfortable.
hmm
It's just sort of embedded and like in the microcosm of the environment, right? Like in a family setting in which I, yes, have proximity to whiteness, which again is super problematic, right? Like it can give you privileges that it's not fair that you have.
Right.
It can give you fragility that you really shouldn't have. It's a complicated thing, but you would think that that would give me more power in the context of the family, and it doesn't necessarily, right? And
Sure.
this is something I've talked to a number of mixed race people with white mothers. And I think this is very complicated because the racial dynamics can make it really hard to address the gender dynamics in a family, right?
hmm
If you're the white person, white woman, how do you tell your not white husband that they're being
hmm
sexist, right? People aren't good at talking about intersectional identity. And
Well,
intersectional identity, right, means that you're the combination of all of
yeah.
your
Well, they're
identities.
not good at talking about like just sexism itself, let alone intersectional issues.
Right. So, like, a white woman can absolutely be the subject of sexism from a non white man. Also, her white womanhood can, as anyone who's ever heard anything about Emmett Till knows, create massive danger for non white men, right?
Yep.
And that's a very complicated dynamic to unpack in which some people have gender power, other people don't have gender power. Some people have race power, other people don't have race power. And that's a very, very complicated thing to
And
parse.
what would you say to people who say they're bigoted people who claim that that's why interracial marriage is a problem in general? Is like these they're say, "Oh, I'm not racist. I just think there are these like cultural dynamics that make interracial relationships problematic." And how do you respond to that kind of argument?
I think there are cultural differences that can be add complication to marriage. I think that's completely and totally true. I just don't think they're necessarily tied to race, right? Like, if you are marrying across class lines, there may be cultural differences that can be complicated and that you'll need to navigate. If somebody is from France and the other person, a friend of mine tells a story about doing a visa interview with the State Department. And it was a married couple and they'd been married forever and they're coming in to prove that they're married so that they can move to the United States. And, if somebody's been married 3 months when they show up, you really interrogate them because you want to know, is it a marriage for a visa? These people have been married for 20 years. They have children
Yeah.
who are, starting college.
Yeah.
Basically what has happened is both kids have gone to college in the United States. And so the parents are okay, we're relocating or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, one of them was from a country with very particular coffee drinking culture. You drink coffee at these times of day. The other person was from Seattle. So my friend said, what's a big cultural tension in your marriage? And they both burst out laughing and said coffee. Because the person in Seattle thinks that you put a pot of coffee on in the morning and then you drink it until it's gone and then you make another one.
Yeah.
And you drink coffee all day. And the person from the country with really prescribed coffee drinking culture is you drink coffee with milk in the morning and you can have one more cup of coffee at this time in the afternoon and then you're done. Maybe you can have a cup of coffee with dessert. And that's a European country, right? That's white people. Everyone in this marriage is white. And so racial difference doesn't determine cultural difference. And cultural difference, it can be challenging and needs to be navigated. But that can happen there are people who think that what you do on Thanksgiving is spend time with your family, talking and having conversations and visiting with people who have come a long way. And there are people who think what you do on Thanksgiving is watch a football game.
Or stick the spoon in both dishes. There's people who do that too.
Right. But I have often thought, oh my God, what would I do if I fell in love with somebody who wanted to watch the game on Thanksgiving?
Right.
Could a marriage survive that?
Right.
And that could be the person next door who is like you in every way.
Yeah, exactly. All right. I wanted to also mention before we move to the end here, some things that stood out to me as I'm reading through this. And one of them was, you mentioned this before, where when you would talk about instances of racism or discrimination that you encountered, and your mom would try to relate to you by talking about sexism or misogyny. And you pointed out already kind of what was difficult about that. But what really stood out to me is where you said you needed her to acknowledge the gap between you, the difference between you, the chasm in some ways between you, in order for you to be intimately close together. In order to be close, acknowledge the gap rather than deny or ignore it.
I think that for my mother, this idea that there are things about my experience that she can never understand makes it harder for her to understand how we could be close. Right?
Yeah, I get that. I totally, as a parent thinking about my own kids, I can sympathize.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes sense, right? I sometimes feel like I just really want to be heard and understood.
Yeah.
And I sometimes wonder whether that comes from feeling like neither of my parents totally understood me. Maybe for this interracial reason, and maybe nobody ever understands anybody else perfectly, right? Fundamentally part of the human condition, right?
There's always a gap, yeah.
But for me, if we can acknowledge the gap, if we can acknowledge that you don't automatically, when my mom brings forth an experience of sexism, a lot of the time, I'm sort of I don't feel like it demonstrates understanding of the experience. It doesn't demonstrate understanding about how there's this additional factor in my navigation that she doesn't have.
Yeah, it changes the topic in a way.
Right. It feels like she's saying, well, about me. And that's not what she means to do. She means to be bridging a connection by empathetically sharing from her own experience. Whereas I've got and my mom has really worked hard to learn to do this, by the way. I feel like it's really important to say that she has really worked on this thing. But I have a lot of white women friends who are my peers, who I think were raised more with the idea that there's this gulf created by race. And they tend to listen and ask questions, or to say, gee, I have this kind of experience. Or we'll talk about our experiences as women and we'll come up with common ground. But they will often sort of caveat and say, like, I know that I'm a white woman. Is this how you experience it as well? Or is it different because you're not white? And that allows me to feel much closer because I feel like they're not needing to ignore the differences in our experience.
Yeah, intimacy comes out of acknowledging a distance.
Right. I mean, and I kind of, like, I've never thought of this, and so I've never said this to my mother. But if one is heterosexual, there is in one's romantic relationships, in one's marriages and things like that, this gender gap. In which one person is, you know, really being shafted by patriarchy in lots and lots of ways. And the other person is also being shafted by patriarchy.
In different ways.
But in less obvious ways, right? And in ways that are, you know, I'm not saying that, like...
Yeah, I'm on board. No, yeah, I'm on board. There's a whole episode about how sexism also hurts men, although it's worse for women.
Sexism also hurts men, but sexism does not result in men being killed by their partners at a crazy rate or still earning dramatically less for equal pay for equal work, right? Like, absolutely, patriarchy and sexism hurt men, but not in comparable ways, right?
Exactly.
And so, do we think, is that an irreparable bar to closeness in friendships across genders, in romantic relationships, in mother-son relationships or father-daughter relationships? People don't necessarily say that, right?
Yeah.
There are lots of people who are closer to their opposite gender parent. I have friends who are like mind-blowingly close to their same gender siblings. But I also have friends who are closer to their opposite gender siblings because there was less competition, right? Like, it plays out in lots of different ways. And I think that that's where acknowledging the difference, right?
Right. Feeds intimacy.
Is really helpful.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. 2 more questions. The first one is just, I'm interested in an example, something that you'd like to say that you wish more people understood about what it's like to grow up in a mixed race family. Something that you really wish more people understood about that experience.
I think that I wish that people understood 2 things. The first is that it can be very hard, especially for a little kid who is learning how to behave, when a behavior that is praised in one part of the family is criticized in another part of the family. And children learn to code switch really early and really well.
What's like an example of that?
This is funny. I'm actually coming up with an example not from my life, but from this book, but from my first book.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm sorry. It's because you told me that you're in Salt Lake and now I have Mormonism on the mind.
Okay.
So in my first book, I talk about this couple, and they're a Mormon-Jewish couple.
Okay.
And they are teaching their kids about both religions. And so somebody died. And one of the little kids, and they were with the Jewish side of the family.
Okay.
And one of the little kids said, well, we will be with them again.
Sure.
And then she paused and said, in our memories.
Right.
And it was like she realized that she was in the wrong side of the family for that one.
Right. That's pretty deep.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, the example that I would give is in my mom's family, if somebody says to you, would you like a cup of tea? You're supposed to say yes or no. If you say no, it probably will not be offered again.
Okay.
And you are most certainly not supposed to say, if you're a kid in the family, oh, would you like a cup of tea? Let me get up and get it for you, and then go start rooting around in somebody else's kitchen. On my dad's side of the family, if you're offered a cup of tea, you're supposed to say no. And it will be offered again. And like the second or third time, it's okay to say yes. But it's rude to say yes the first time. But also what you should say, if you're a younger person in the family, is you should deduce that on some level, the older person wants the cup of tea. And you should say, would you like a cup of tea? Can I fix it for you? And then you should go and root around in their kitchen and make the tea. Now, you shouldn't do this if you're like a friend.
Sure.
But if you're a younger visiting niece or nephew.
Sure.
In my mom's family, like, there are people who I've lived with and I'm super comfortable in their house and I would help myself to something.
Sure.
But there are also people where I'm like, feel like I'm a guest and I wouldn't
presume.
Yeah. So it would be presuming to go mess around with somebody else's kitchen. Whereas on the other side of the family, you both are in my mom's side, if you say no to that first cup of tea, you're not going to get a cup of tea. Unless you say an appropriate amount of time later, actually, if you're still offering, I've reconsidered. But it probably won't get offered again. And on my dad's side, it'll get offered several times. It's rude to say yes the first time. You need to wait until the second or third time. And maybe you should then get up and offer to make it. And so, like, you can see how that would be confusing.
Yeah.
When you're little, right? Like, and I didn't know until I had spent years offending people that I was supposed to be offering to make the tea. I had been politely assuming I was a guest and it wasn't my kitchen.
Right.
Like, I had learned the part where I needed to say no the first time. But I never did pick up on the fact that I was supposed to be offering to make it. Because the cousin who would jump up and offered to make it lived with my aunt during the summers. He was also a cousin. His parents live in India. He was with his dad's side of the family during the school year and his mom's side during the summers. So I was thinking of me as a guest and him as a resident.
Right.
And so I didn't pick up that I was supposed to be doing that. A more basic example is in the United States, you generally speaking show respect by making eye contact. And in India, if you're a child or a woman, you show respect by or somehow subordinate, you look down.
Oh, okay.
And I know that intellectually, but it's almost impossible for me to do. And ironically, it's my Indian father who was the person who, when yelling at you, would say, look me in the eye when I'm talking to you. Because he knew that looking away is a sign of disrespect in America, and he wanted to be shown respect, and he understood that we were American.
Right.
But, like, as a result, even though I know that, I just feel like I'm being horrible and rude if I'm not making eye contact.
Okay, good examples. Oh, and then you're connecting back. I think you said there were two things that you...
Yes. So the other thing that I wish people knew or had a way of thinking about is what is assimilation and what is having a mixed heritage. So one problem that, and I don't know if this is how it is now. I have like individual relationships with Indian people, but I don't like go to Indian community events, right? Like I'm not in that network. When I was, for instance, having my last try at joining Indian communal things in college, my sort of evidence of white culture was seen as problematic assimilation. So like the fact that I would rather have matzo ball soup than khichdi, which is true, I would way rather, was seen as like trying to be white rather than my mother. I mean, my mother actually, I think, makes khichdi very well, but like rather than I am legitimately also part of this culture.
Yeah.
Right? It's seen as this problematic active assimilation or like power grab towards whiteness.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's never that. I think there's always that possibility.
That's the thing, is
for,
it
like,
could be
a problematic power grab.
Right.
But also, like, the comfort food of your childhood is often the comfort food of your mother's childhood.
That's right.
And so, like, I don't eat Jell-O anymore because Jell-O is usually not vegetarian. But, like, when I was homesick, I was fed Jell-O and chicken noodle soup, not khichdi. My mother makes khichdi, but it isn't the thing that she thought of to serve sick children. She thought of dry toast and applesauce and matzo ball soup and raspberry Jell-O or red Jell-O. I don't know if Jell-O really maps onto fruit.
It's got fruit flavors. We're talking with Samira Mehta. She's an associate professor of women and gender studies and Jewish studies, and her research and teaching focuses on the intersections of religion, culture, and gender. And we're talking about the book, The Racism of People Who Love You, Essays on Mixed Race Belonging. And Samira also mentioned her earlier book. This one's Beyond Chrismukkah, The Christian-Jewish Interfaith Family in America. Both of those books people can check out. All right, well, we've got to the final segment here, and this is where we talk about regrets, challenges, or surprises. You can speak to any of these things. If there's something you would change about the book now, what was challenging about the book, or what surprised you in the course of writing it?
So one thing that I don't even know how I made this mistake, the assimilation chapter was supposed to have this cute putty title. And somehow I had 2 documents on my computer and one that I was working on that chapter in. One had the cute punny title and it was Sorry, Not Sorry, like SORRY. Or SARI,
sorry,
comma, not
yeah.
SORRY, right?
Yeah, sorry,
And I had
not
2
sorry.
documents, and one was like a rough draft, and the other was supposed to be notes. And somehow the final one that got submitted said assimilation instead of the punny title, and it
Or
never got the punny
was it
title.
the one that said appropriation? Was that the one?
No, assimilation.
Which chapter is that?
Isn't there a chapter called assimilation?
Oh,
Oh,
There's
no,
one
you're
called
right. It's the appropriation chapter.
Yeah.
So it was the appropriation chapter was supposed to be called Sorry, Not Sorry. And
So it's just called the
regret that
theme
one.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is too bad.
The other thing, and I think this was inevitable, I told people that I was writing this book if I valued the relationship with them enough, that I would have been willing to take the example out of the book
Mm-hmm.
if they asked me to. But if I didn't think that, if I thought you wouldn't let me say what I had to say, if I thought I would have to deal with a lot of white fragility in talking about it, or if we're not, for whatever reason, close enough now for it to be massively presenting concern,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't reach out. And so I know, for instance, that at least one of my aunts, who I didn't ask, like the aunt characters are composites, but the events are real events that happened with real people. And I made them composites really deliberately, partly because I have 17 aunts and uncles before you start counting my parents' cousins or like close family friends. And so I was like, nobody needs to keep track of that many people. But partly because I didn't want to have anyone be identifiable and be hurt and be talked about. So like they're deliberate composites. But I didn't check about some of the individual incidents. And I wouldn't go back and do it differently, but I know that I've really hurt some feelings.
Yeah.
And I wish that there were a way to tell a truth without hurting feelings. But I think that like part of the concept of white fragility is that when you talk about the racism of progressive white people, you hurt their feelings.
Yeah.
And I would prefer to talk about, to shine a light on the racism so that more of it goes away and more people learn.
Yeah, I guess maybe like fiction could do that, but you're writing essays.
Right. And I don't know how to create a character and a world and a plot. That's not what I do.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. One thing I'll say, though, for the ant composite, one downside is like, if you don't name them, then it could be all of them. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the trade-off is like, by not identifying it, then but it really only count within a small group of people, like the people that really know you, the people that really know your aunts.
Right. And my aunts can tell who's who anyway, because they were there for all of it. Right. Like, but my goal was to really like not say, and this happened in this city. Right. So that the aunt who lives in city A, her friends can believe that it's the aunt who lives in city B. And the aunt who lives in city B, her friends could believe it's the aunt who lives in city C. Right. That was what I wanted.
Yeah. It's tricky writing about that personal stuff. Essays and memoir get into these areas of like, how honest can we be? How do we maintain loving relationships through writing about those things? And so,
what I would say is, I feel like the hurt caused was unavoidable if I was going to be able to tell my truth and my story, but I really regret that. I also will say that there are people I didn't write about, because what I did try to do in the composite is always sort of say, what do I imagine that this person thinks about this? Why to them would they not have been? And there are people in my life who I think are jerks, right? Where I tried when I was like running through what people might be thinking to really give people the benefit of the doubt. And there are people for whom I can't do that. And I didn't write about them.
Yeah.
And so another piece that is hard is if you showed up in this book and you are somebody who is close to me, it means that I care enough about you to want to entertain the question of your interiority despite these things. And so, like, the people who I hurt are actually the people who I love and trust more than the people who I chose not to write about, who I'm like, I think the answer to why you did this is you're kind of a jerk.
Right. And because, again, the book is about the racism of people who love you. Like, there's a loving
and
relationship there.
Some people wanted me to call it the racism of people who you love.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided not to, because I felt like actually the issue is that despite the fact that they love you, they can still be racist towards you. Rather than you love somebody and then you get shocked and surprised and slapped upside the head by their racism.
Right, yeah.
Different story.
All right, Samira, thanks for spending time with us here on Relationscapes. This has been great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Relationscapes. If this is your first time joining me, welcome to the journey. I hope you'll check out some other episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, take a second to rate and review it in Apple Podcasts. I've got some new reviews that came in here. I'm going to read one from, I cannot read that name, but I'll spell it out. It's HBGGSDKGMVCKDKX. So, looks like a keyboard smash. They say the podcast is compelling and compassionate. They say, I learn something new every episode that lets me consider my relationships and my position towards others. Thanks for that review, HBGGSDK, etc. I love seeing those reviews come in. So if you haven't reviewed the show yet, please take a second to do that. If you're listening in Spotify, you can also rate the show there. You can give it a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5-star rating. The best thing you can do, though, is recommend the show to a friend. Send an episode to a friend who you think might enjoy it. I would really appreciate it. Mates of State provides our theme song. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, an independent journalist joining you from Salt Lake City, and I hope to see you back on the trail here with me on Relationscapes.